How does one wake up in the morning and say, I want to donate a kidney to a stranger?
What would you do to save the life of someone you love? Would you donate an organ? I bet many of you would if it meant you could save the life of your spouse, a member of your family, or even a friend. But how far would you go to not only save the life of someone you don't know, but the life of someone you'll never even meet?
When I heard about kidney donations, my first thought was, why is there not a line down the block of the hospital? I would just think everybody would want to do this kind of thing. I really am fascinated by people who look for a connection through something dark.
Please. Well, you may know him as a Hollywood superstar from movies like The Social Network or his Oscar-winning film, A Real Pain. Someone out there has a different relationship to Jesse because they're walking around with his kidney. Here's the thing. They don't even know it. They received a kidney from an anonymous donor. So why endure an abdominal surgery to help a complete stranger with no strings attached? That's what newspapers and magazines have been asking Jesse for months, but he's refused to give anyone an interview.
Well, as you know from our messages, I was incredibly hesitant. I've turned down every interview that I've been asked to do, and I've been asked to do tons of interviews and speak at things, and I don't do it. And I thought, you have a young audience of people who are health curious. Those are the people who are going to hear this and think, oh, I'm that person.
And in a first for the Checkup podcast, Jesse doesn't tell the complete story. To help round out the clinical side of organ transplantation, we have Dr. Robert Montgomery, the director of NYU Langone Transplant Institute, which handled Jesse's donation. But for now, please help me in welcoming Jesse Eisenberg to the Checkup podcast.
Working in Hollywood, you have a diverse array of characters, quite literally, figuratively, theoretically. Is it difficult to mingle with people who come from such diverse backgrounds and schools of thought, especially when it comes to politics and such?
I think you're might be mischaracterizing Hollywood. It's much more homogenous politically than, well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's people who get into the arts, and have maybe a real feeling of not only rebelliousness, but also driven by, great empathy, because you want to think about characters and stories and embody those emotions, and you feel comfortable expressing yourself. It's all things that I would associate more with liberal politics, and, most Hollywood stories are underdog stories. We value kind of the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington kind of thing. And so so that to me is all associated with what I would consider to be, liberal ideals.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it more from a science perspective. And when we look at the perhaps less than ideal scientific environment, that has shifted across aisles, where perhaps 20, 30 years ago, it was more prevalent on the liberal side of things. Now it's kind of overreached into the libertarian conservative side of thought. So I'm curious, when you're speaking to someone in Hollywood who's perhaps anti-science,
the horseshoe theory of healthcare.
Tell me about the horseshoe theory of healthcare.
Oh no, the horseshoe theory of politics is just that, on the extreme left and the extreme right are far closer than they are to the center. But so in terms of health stuff, yes, you occasionally see somebody who has a notion about, an epidemic that's different than your notions.
I love that you call them notions.
Well, I don't know what else to, I don't know what other euphemisms I could use. Yeah, but it's first of all, it's far less frequent than you might imagine.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, to be working on a major movie, it just a major movie. All I mean is it's it's small and
a big production, basically.
Yeah, I just mean you're vetted by so many levels of a system that, you tend to be a little more I would say mainstream about your, thoughts about that stuff. And, for a while, I think for COVID at least, it was a requirement that you're vaccinated to work on a big production. So, maybe it weeds out some people.
Yeah. Being as grounded as you are, empathetic as you are, do you
continue? Yeah, I mean, okay.
Do you ever get questioning? Do you ever begin questioning yourself about things perhaps you should be doing for your health but aren't doing? Do you ever go down that path, looking for quick fixes, thinking about preventive healthcare in a way that is very exciting, very passionate?
Oh, that's interesting. Not really. I had to I played like a bodybuilder in a movie like 3 years ago or something. And yes, I was just like trying to gain weight. It was like a struggle for me to gain weight, which I know is like enviable, I guess. But like in my situation for that, it was difficult because I really wanted to gain, not just weight, but muscle. And so, yeah, I was like taking, creatine. I mean, I'm not doing steroids or anything like that. But yes, I was trying I was working with a guy, a trainer or whatever, but I was taking like all sorts of supplements I didn't know anything about.
Did you notice a change with the supplements?
Yeah. Of course,
okay.
I gained a lot of muscle, for this movie.
But probably not from the supplements, more so from the workouts. And
I'm sure
nutrition.
Yeah, sure. I couldn't tell you if I was taking like a chalk in a capsule or creatine, I have no idea about that stuff, and I recognize that, or I have like a skepticism about the supplement industry.
You do?
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's exciting. I don't know. These days, a lot of people just have natural belief in it.
Oh, I know. I understand the temptation to have a belief in it, but am I wrong in saying that it's like just a totally unregulated market and we don't know what's in there, and every time they test, people come back surprised?
Keep going. That was so good.
Is that true?
That's very true.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that seems to be the case.
And it's, I think your view of it is quite pure because of, if you're spending a lot of time on social media, which unfortunately I do because of my work and trying to understand these perspectives, I find that there is this huge belief in this unregulated industry, so much so that it corrupts people's relationship with healthcare as a whole. And that gets me really upset and frustrated and all that.
Oh, you're saying the suspicion around something that you should be suspicious about then bleeds into things that you should not be suspicious about?
Partly, yes, but also the fact that they have created an enemy of the healthcare system, of the pharmaceutical industry. Oh. They've heard so much negative about it that they now view this as the cure for it.
Oh, I see.
Where it is.
This just comes from a sense of boredom?
I think it's going to be individually dependent a lot, but
if we were in a war zone, wouldn't we all just want penicillin at the ready?
Yes.
And is it based on the fact that we're not in a war zone that we want fish oils?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's problems of progress.
Problems of progress?
Yeah, or safetyism.
Of what?
Safetyism, that we live in a safer society, crime rates are lower than they were the decade before and the decade prior. So as a result, we're creating worries that perhaps are unnecessary worries, and we have more free time, especially these days when we can have food delivered to us, pretty much everything delivered to us at our beck and call, and you don't have to be a billionaire in order to have that happen.
That's interesting. I recognize a kind of cousin of that in myself, and I wonder if you share it too, because we have semi-similar backgrounds, which is like Eastern European families. And I recognize in myself a kind of like anxiety about nothing. I think just based on generations and generations of people worried about getting killed, I feel a kind of paranoia, but I tack it on to things like I had too much coffee this morning and I might not sleep in 12 hours from now because I had too much coffee. And I find myself worrying about things that are just fantastical nonsense. But I think maybe it's because I have been wired for war. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my wife's family is a similar immigrant story to your family, and experienced real horrors. And my wife is, a paranoid, but she thinks it's because that there might be asbestos in our house, when it's been painted over for generations and it's fine, stuff like that. Do you have this feeling at all based on your family history as well?
I don't know that I necessarily have that feeling, but I definitely yearn for control probably more than the average person, which is why being on a plane freaks me out. More so now than ever before.
I see, just not being in control of the...
not being in control of the scenario.
Did your family suffer the horrors of the past?
I don't know that they suffered specifically horrors of the past. I know that there was a lot of anti-Semitism where we were growing up in Russia, and that's the reason why we left.
Yeah. And during World War II, they were where? Were they fighting in the Russian army? Or?
Hard to know. My grandfather was part of the war. He was part of the Russian Air Force. And he was very pro-Stalin, go Stalin. And my dad was very anti-Stalin. So it was interesting how the generations would debate amongst themselves. And I didn't know which side to take.
Your dad was alive during Stalin?
No, but,
the ethos of Stalin.
Ethos of Stalin.
Oh, wow.
And discussing how terrible he treated the population versus my grandfather, who served in his military believed that he should support it. So I saw their conflict about it.
I see.
I get confused in thinking about that notion that anxieties could be coming from generations of the past is because on one side, it seems like sci-fi, right? Oh, we're suffering as a result of our past generation suffering.
Oh, that's not how I think about it at all.
Oh, how do you think about it?
I don't think about it in any kind of like molecular level.
But here's the cool thing. There is a molecular pathway.
I bet there is. That's just, I'm not smart enough to conceive of that. So I just think of it very practically, is that my mom, who grew up with paranoid parents, who grew up with paranoid grandparents, who grew up with paranoid great-grandparents, she used to wake me up in the middle of the night because she would have dreams that I was drowning, and she wanted to make sure I was alive. So she would wake me up and tell me that she had a nightmare about me drowning. And so of course I never learned how to swim. So yes, there perhaps is the cellular, whatever memory. But
then there's the human aspect.
Yeah, I just think of it as this very obvious thing of my mom was paranoid that I was going to drown because her parents were paranoid that the Cossacks were going to, you know what I mean? Something like that.
And it highlights the notion of how much humans are nature and nurture.
Of course.
And the combination
Can you
of the
explain
two.
to me the biological
component? I wish I was smart enough to explain it well, but there is something called epigenetics, where your experiences and how you move through the world can impact your genetic code and your genetic expression. So if you have this family history of people who were highly anxious, highly nervous about not dancing in the prairie because there were lions about or there was a military coming, perhaps that has been passed down genetically to you in a way where perhaps the genes weren't impacted, but the expression of those genes were impacted. And then there's the behavioral aspect, because from a survival standpoint, if your parents are a certain way and it taught you to survive in that way, you then pass that down to your children. But now I'm seeing it kind of on the flip side, where a lot of my patients' children are doing the opposite of what their parents are doing, or perhaps disagreeing with them on the political side of things. How do you fall on that when discussing politics or stuff with your family?
Oh, we're completely in line.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like discussing politics in public because I just feel silly. Because my platform is not from politics. My platform is from, running from zombies in an effective way. So I feel a little silly talking about politics because I feel unqualified. But, I come from a very, very cliche, liberal Jewish family, 100 years of voting for American Democrats. I mean, and it's, and it's very simply summarized by my aunt, who was my mentor in my life. She died at 107 in 2019. I lived with her in my 30s. She was my main relative that I was close to and admired. Anyway,
what did you admire about her?
Oh, she just was so practical. She grew up in Poland, and she was just like so comically unsentimental, and I just I wish I had that. I wish I grew up in her era where I could be like that too, instead of this kind of, worried, anxious about social situation, all this nonsense that just seems like fantasy. But anyway, just to explain my politics really briefly, I just asked her once, have you voted for Republican ever? And she said no. And I said, why? And she said, because I care about the poor. She said this so bluntly, and I'm sure many Republicans care about the poor and everything, but for me, it just explained this kind of coming here poor to America and just kind of caring about the people that you identify with. So anyway, that was our family's politics, but there's nothing more fascinating than that about it, or strident. In terms of her, I admire that so much. This kind of, because it's the opposite of the world I live in. The world I live in, because I'm an actor, is where we talk about everything that we're thinking and everything that we're doing. And I'm sitting here with a mic an inch from my face, as I often am sitting with a mic an inch from my face. And I'm so disgusted by that, by myself, that of course I end up admiring these people who not only are like not touting their own accomplishments, but actually kind of turned off to the idea that their accomplishments should be discussed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's interesting how in Hollywood it almost forces you to behave in that way in order to be successful.
Yes.
Right? Because if you're not promoting the movie, it seems like you're disinterested and you can actually come off more problematic.
Great point. That's a great point. I'm in this weird industry and in a weird time where, when I started acting, there was like, people would go on Jay Leno's show, The Tonight Show, now Jimmy Fallon. People would go on Leno and it would be seen, everybody liked Jay Leno personally, but it would be seen as like, I got to go on this show. It felt like selling out. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it felt like the worst thing you could do is I have to go talk about the movie and everything. And now you have to rap on Jimmy Fallon with your shirt off in order to sell your movie. And again, it's fine. Like, that's all fine. And Jimmy Fallon's really great too. And everybody loves him and he's brilliant and the show's great and everything like that. But the kind of like the slope of kind of what we open ourselves up to publicly is so steep since I started acting. And so I have a little bit of that old mentality of like, I should not talk about myself so much. I should not do all these games and make myself look so cute and accessible, because A, it makes me uncomfortable, but B, does it really help my job when I'm trying to play a character and you're trying to believe that the story is this? But primarily it just makes me feel a little strange.
Sure. What do you think has driven that change in Hollywood that people feel they need to be more accessible?
Well, first of all, it's a necessity of the industry. You're auditioning for so few parts. Actors are up for so few parts, and I cast movies now because I'm making movies, and when I get
Flex.
What's that?
Flex.
Yeah, no idea. But like when I get like resumes from the agents, it talks about how many followers they have, and this is something that I don't consider because my movies are not like big commercial things, but it's something definitely somebody is considering.
Interesting.
And maybe even my investors are considering, so that's like a thing. So that's part of it. A lot of people would say this is a necessity. And then of course there's the temptation to have your thoughts and feelings and jokes in public, and people just have that temptation. I do too, but I do it in different ways. Like I wrote a comic essay that's in the New Yorker this week. Like that is my version of Twitter, like I want to have my funny jokes, public, because whatever, narcissism. But I have like maybe access to old style media, like a magazine or a traditional movie that allows me to exercise all that stuff that I want to do,
Yeah.
And if I didn't have that stuff, then sure, I'd be on Twitter all day doing my jokes, of course.
Yeah. You know what upset me so much after our Time Magazine meeting was that I went to go try and find that Time Magazine in a bodega somewhere in New York.
Yeah.
And I walked 2 miles,
Yeah.
stopping at every bodega. Not one sold magazines.
Wait, was that right?
Yeah.
No one sold magazines. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So as a
Yeah.
medium, it was like, oh man, magazines aren't a thing anymore. People don't seem to
That's true. But
want to
what
purchase
about
them.
the internet time?
Well, yeah, you could find it
People watching
online.
there? Yeah. But
So,
I imagine that's
just the
where most
medium has
people are looking at
changed,
it.
and
Of course.
maybe I romanticize it a bit of like opening the thing and seeing like, oh my God, there
Yeah,
it is.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
I'm curious, you talk a lot in other podcasts, and we've actually discussed it a bit with your experience with social anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, like even with the Time Magazine event that we were both very lucky to attend, I saw you for sitting across the room, and I have also, I consider myself an introvert. I have social anxiety, and I said, oh, I'd love to approach you to have this conversation that we're having today.
Mm-hmm.
And it took 100,000 effort to just come over and say hi to you. How do you do that at scale in Hollywood when you're meeting all these very big name, high profile individuals? How do you handle your social anxiety? What strategies do you use?
Oh, I guess I don't go to a lot of things. There are some people who do go to a lot of things. I'm just not one of them.
Okay.
And so I don't really have that. But, a lot of times when I'm at, some industry thing, like I went to the premiere of a play the other night, like I knew half the audience because we worked together in theater.
Okay.
And so when you know somebody and you work with them in theater, especially in theater, where you kind of, you're overwhelmed with the feeling of warmth for these people, at least that's my feeling. And then some some like bigger industry things that I'm forced to go to an award show or something. Yeah, that's not like my place of comfort. And I don't know that I have any good strategies, but, it's like an obligation. When I was, first got kind of well known and I got invited to award shows and stuff, I would complain to my father all the time. This was during the Obama administration. So I would tell my dad, I can't believe I have to go to this thing. It's so stupid. It's so shallow. It's so fake. Everybody acts so fake. My dad said, Obama is probably, sitting with, a contingent of, farmers in Iowa right now. Does he really want to go to that so he can listen about, corn seeding, for 3 hours? No, but you do things out of obligation because they're a bigger part of your job and respect for your industry. And as soon as he said that, I saw everything completely different. I saw these award shows as promoting an industry that's been good to me and televising an award show. And sure, awards are all shallow and all that stuff. But my father gave me such great perspective to understand that these are like, the kind of obligatory things of being lucky in a competitive industry and supporting an industry that's allowed me to have a family and an apartment and everything.
Is your dad a therapist? Because that's like cognitive behavioral therapy with changing I have to do something. We call it masturbation, actually.
What do you mean?
Masturbation.
I understand.
Because we all often say like, we must do something, we have to do something, when in reality, you're fortunate enough to do it, or you actually do want to do it. So Obama wants to sit with those farmers because he wants to be president.
That's right. That's a great way to think
that
about
mind
it.
shift set that he created for you is what we would achieve to do in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Is there some point though where you would tell somebody, don't do that, create your boundary?
Well, it would be a choice, and you have to come to a place where you're comfortable making the choice and living with the consequences of making that choice. So perhaps if you don't want to meet with farmers, you'd be making that choice in perhaps the risk of your presidency or your campaign. And if you're okay with that risk, that's a risk calculation that's comfortable for you.
Right, like anything
which is
else.
All life is.
Yeah, it's like anything else. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So I guess that's kind of what I was doing. But I guess also it just kind of made me look at things in a way that was less worried about them being shallow or meaningful and more just about, and it's also a little bit of like humbling of my own, kind of pretense, I would say.
Sure. This is a bit of a strange question, but do you find it more difficult to fail in private or succeed in public for your nervous system?
Wait, more difficult?
Yeah. Like what's more of a strain for you? Because it seems like going to these award shows is succeeding in public.
Yeah.
But would you rather succeed in public and have that difficulty on your nervous system or fail in private?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am like a wired as like a not very happy person. And so both things kind of make me feel really uncomfortable. And so I do notice that like when I'm, I went through like a period of like not working that much and stuff. And like, I was really depressed and I thought my career is over. And then, 2 years later, I don't have a second free, and I'm getting praised or whatever. And I feel like, this is so awful and meaningless. This is so disgusting. Who have I turned into? And so, I think I'm wired a certain way to like kind of be, not pleased, with my own, feelings about things. And so I'm not sure. Both are really uncomfortable for me. I guess at least if you're working, you're making a living, and I guess there's some like
the practical sense,
there's practical benefits of like being unhappy about success. I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting because in thinking about the hedonic treadmill of it all, of seeing follower counts or movie box office results, you constantly want to see better. When you don't see better, you get upset. When you take a break from doing it, you're wondering why you're not doing it. You start questioning yourself.
Of course.
And that anxiety is just perpetually there no matter what. It's kind of ingrained in us in humans. It's the power of negativity or the power of bad that we all experience. And I think the power of negativity is why I think podcasts have risen to such popularity, and social media as a whole, as a sort of platform, because people love to look for controversy. That's why rubbernecking exists, why humans, when they see a fight, we all want to run and watch. So social media is just an extension of that. In fact, in a lot of ways, the social media algorithm is just a mirror of us as a society.
What's the purpose of us being attracted to that kind of thing?
That's a good question. Perhaps with your bachelor's degree, you'd probably be more suited to answer that question.
And anthropology,
Yeah.
over the course of 18 years, getting a bachelor's degree. No, I'm like the least qualified to answer anything. I don't know. I remember when there was like fights in school, and remember in middle school, they were like, they're going to fight on the lawn, which was like a block and a half away. And I remember just being terrified. I remember just feeling like a little kid, like I can't.
Like worried for them?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Oh.
And really turned my stomach that there was this bloodlust amongst my peers. Like, we want to go watch that. Oh, it just scared me so much. I can remember it now. I could remember these sweet, thin kids fighting each other on the lawn, and just how sad I was to be there. And I couldn't look up, and I was sad. And I knew these kids, they were sweethearts. They were sweet kids. They were both in the good spelling group and reading group and everything. And then they were fighting. It just disgusted me to this day. Yeah,
wow. You have such a strong level of empathy.
Oh, is that what it is?
I mean, you're seeing someone else experience something and you're having all the feelings of it, which is the mirroring that our neurons do quite well.
Oh.
But you're doing it and experiencing at such a high level. So I'm curious, does that help you in your line of work because you're able to mirror so well?
Oh, maybe I didn't, think about it. The only thing I do think about it, maybe I had never connected this, but I started my writing career as a playwright, and I've had like 5 plays here in New York, and I'm often criticized for writing unlikable characters, and to me these characters are incredibly likable because they do mean things in the plays and everything, but to me my heart breaks for these kind of broken people who are misbehaving, and I was always shocked that I would get characterized this way. And then after I did The Social Network too, I did a few other movies where I played a mean person. I did a Batman movie. I played a villain. I do these Now You See Me movies. I play these arrogant characters. We just had a new one come out a few months ago. And to me, I sympathize with these people. They're control freaks, and they're anxious and I get criticized for, once again, playing an arrogant, mean, unlikable character. And it's funny, I'm just connecting this now for the first time because you brought up empathy. Maybe I do have empathy for people like that, whereas mainstream audiences, it seems, between my plays and these movies, maybe don't connect to my characters as much as I do. They see it as unlikable, whereas to me it seems like, no, these are
flawed humans,
yes,
like we all are.
We should have the most sympathy for these people.
Yeah.
The first movie I directed, I got really criticized. It was called When You Finish Saving the World, for having 2 leads that were like not relatable lead roles. And to me, my heart broke for those 2 people. And mainstream audiences really rejected the movie as not finding a way into these characters. And it taught me a lot about what audiences want. And then for my second movie, which was the one I made in Poland, I completely reimagined my connection to completely reimagined what an audience would feel for characters, and I made them far more likable.
Interesting. So you actually had to shift as a result of adapting to the mainstream audience.
Out of a complete terror and panic, because I was editing my first movie, and we were sending out the screeners early on. While you're editing, you send it out just for kind of feedback from other people.
Thing.
Yes, we sent it out to an editor who's like one of the great editors in American film, and he just screamed at me for an hour on the phone. How could I have made something like this? The characters, there was no way in, and they were not doing things that were sympathetic. And I realized, he's going to be the voice of a lot of people. And so, even before we were halfway through finish editing that movie, I wrote my next movie, which was about 2 kids going to see where their, family died in the Holocaust. How much more sympathy can you have? And a lot of that was just a reaction to feeling like, I'd done something that was not aligned with general audiences.
Do you share the same empathy that you have for these villainous characters that perhaps you would also feel for those who are part of the justice system, that are criminals, that have been sentenced to crimes? Do you also feel that level of empathy for them as well?
Oh my God, of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, unless somebody seems, like a immoral,
Yeah, I'm curious, what is your level? Like if you see someone do a truly heinous act, Because I'm trying to think about this from a movie script perspective, obviously.
Yeah.
So you have someone who is a serial killer.
Yeah.
But do you then start wondering about their mindset? How do they get there?
Yes, that's where my mind goes immediately. I don't have this bloodlust or feeling of like, deep revenge or retribution.
Or justice. Yeah.
No, I don't have that. I have a feeling of what is driving that person. God, their lives must be miserable too. Does anybody want to be a killer?
From a place of curiosity or from a place of, I'd like to fix that?
Oh, I guess, that's a great question. I guess I don't really think of myself as a, fixer.
Okay.
I just am reacting to it kind of on a gut level of feeling bad. I feel very lucky to be able to be nice. To me, that's a great privilege. It means I don't have to worry about where my next meal is coming from. It means I have enough resources that I can go and help somebody if they drop something on the street or donate an organ or whatever. This is a great privilege, When there are limited resources, it's understandable that people become competitive and mean.
Sure.
When you're hungry, you think about how angry we get when we're hungry now. And we have...
Hangry. We have a word for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So imagine a population who's experiencing that and what it must do to them. Yeah, of course.
How does one wake up in the morning and say, I want to donate a kidney to a stranger?
For me, I just I think we briefly spoke. I had heard about it on a podcast, and they were talking about effective altruism. It was an interview with somebody who was part of that movement, and they talked about donating a kidney not being like a big deal. And
Interesting.
well, I mean, it's not. I mean, I have experienced zero negative consequences. Zero. I don't have to even watch the alcohol I drink. I've experienced zero negative consequences.
I love that. That's the barometer. Do I have to watch how much alcohol?
Well, yeah, no. For me, it's like I don't drink much anyway. But like, all I'm saying is like even my most, let's say debaucherous activity doesn't have to be curtailed. Yeah. Not that I'm so thrilled I get to drink. But like, no, but it's true. So, I don't know. Look, I come from a family of vegetarians. I'm not a vegetarian. When we just did Thanksgiving, what we do is Thanksgiving, where we adopt turkeys, put the turkeys' pictures on the table while we eat tofu. And my sister reads from Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals book, where she stands up and reads, they clip the beaks off the turkey with a boiling knife, and so we're not eating meat, but we're also shamed about meat eating as a concept. And we adopt these turkeys, and the pictures of the turkeys are on the table with names and what they like doing, like facing into a nice breeze or something.
Where do you adopt them from? How does one adopt a turkey?
Oh, from like maybe the Farm Sanctuary, which is a place upstate, which adopts, which rescues animals.
Got it.
Anyway, I say all this because I'm a meat eater. I leave that knowing everything that my sister's read in the book about the hot knife and factory farming, and I eat meat. And I recognize totally this is not ethical. This is something I think we'll probably look back on the factory farming system as completely, unethical, retrograde, brutal. And I don't do that. So I'm not like a great person. I recognize that. There are things in my life
Is that the barometer that like you have to be perfect to be great?
No, but I think if you know a lot about something and you still choose not to engage with it, then yeah, there's some ethical gap there. I know so much about the factory farming system. Because I grew up in a family with vegetarians and vegans. And so I don't do anything about it. So yeah, I think there's a gap there in my ethics. If I was ignorant about it, I wouldn't have as much, I think, complicity. So with the kidney thing, to me, it was like a non-sacrifice in any way. To me, I talked to my sister about it. She's nervous. She wants to do it because she heard about it from me and everything, but she's nervous to do it for a dozen reasons, like a lot of people who say that they're very nervous to do it for a dozen reasons. And yet I look at her getting a soy milk latte or something, and I'm like, I can't believe she's
making
not
that
getting
sacrifice.
That. Yeah. So I think, we think of sacrifices. My wife's a teacher. She goes to school every day. I sometimes go in with her and I'm like, this is a grueling job. You don't get to talk about what you want to talk about. You have to talk about, this Gothic series that the curriculum's forcing them to read, and so, I think we all have sacrifices. You drove in 2 hours today from your house. I, walked from 13 blocks, you made a sacrifice because you have dogs and you want to live in the suburbs. I live in the city because it's convenient to everything that I want to do. So I think we all have sacrifices we want to make, and we're all calculating the risk rewards of those sacrifices. And for me, donating a kidney, I don't even call it a sacrifice. I got treated like a king in a hospital for 3 days. I got, they give you a lunch order and you could order anything you want on the thing. It's exciting because you press a little button on the computer on your TV of what you want to eat. And to me, it was like just this fun experience where I got kind of like treated really nicely. And yes, it also ends up, saving somebody's life, but it's too abstract a concept for me to even understand that it's saving somebody's life. I don't know who the person is. I don't know what it means to have.
Did you choose not to know who the person is?
Kind of, like you have to opt in to know who the person is. And so the baseline is not knowing. If you want to know who it is, it's quite an effort. You have to write a letter to them, and they have to choose to accept and write a letter to you, and it goes through the intermediaries through the hospitals. To me, it was like, the truth of my surgery was unusual, which is that the person who was my intended recipient, who I did not know, came into the hospital while I was getting my operation. They came into their hospital in Pennsylvania or Chicago or something, and they were sick. They couldn't get the operation that day.
Oh, wow.
So while I was like halfway through my surgery, obviously I'm unaware, they had to find another recipient. So they called the next person down in a different state, and that person has to get their bags, pack up their family, whatever they need, and go to the hospital because my kidney comes out of me, gets put on a helicopter at the hospital.
Very VIP kidney you have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It goes to Teterboro Airport, the private airport in outside the city, and it flies to another city, goes to a helicopter, and goes to that hospital. Wow. So it's an immediate process. My kidney was out by 10 in the morning and was in somebody at 3. Isn't that incredible?
Wow. And is that person aware that it's your kidney? Like, you might not be aware, but are they?
They're not, but I was thinking, since I'm like doing some interviews now about it, and I may have mentioned when I donated my kidney, maybe if people are like internet savvy and curious, maybe they would suspect, but there were probably, a dozen people getting new kidneys that day.
Okay, fair. Because it would be interesting if you come home one day and there's a letter and it's like, thank you for the kidney. And you wouldn't know if that's real or not.
Yeah, I started writing a movie 10 years ago and I didn't finish it, but it's about, somebody who donates their kidney and then...
This is before you donated your kidney.
Yeah.
So you were interested in this process long before you pulled the trigger.
Well, I really am fascinated by people who look for a connection through something dark. And so I, thought of a guy, a very lonely person, donates their kidney to a man with a family and a life and a job. And then because this donor has not much going on in their lives, they attach themselves to this person who then feels compelled to be friends with them because they saved their lives. Right. But that donor overtakes their life. And I mentioned this to a doctor, and the doctor was saying, like, please don't do that.
To scare people away from the process.
Yeah, so it's on the back burner now.
So why, when you're writing this 10 years ago, you weren't thinking about donating a kidney, but then in 2025 you were?
Really what had happened was this. I was listening to this podcast and maybe 10 years ago, maybe 2015 or something. I was listening to this podcast and they were talking about kidney donations and effective altruism. And they mentioned something called Be the Match, which was, I think, for like bone marrow or something. And so I listened to the podcast and I went online and I ordered a Be the Match kit, which is they send you like a swab for your cheek or whatever. Sure. And so I sent it in and I never heard back. I knew I was on the list because I would get emails from Be the Match. Well, yeah. They're like, this is your mouth is gross. But basically, I would get emails. I knew I was on the mailing list because I would get emails from Be the Match, but it was never that I was a match.
Okay.
And I conflated that with not being able to donate a kidney. And so I thought, I'm not a donor, but I think really it's just for bone marrow.
I suspect that's the case. Yeah.
So now it's 10 years later. This summer. I'm trying to write a movie about doctors in Guatemala. So I go to Guatemala and I'm with a doctor. She's from California, but she's my guide in Guatemala, in rural Guatemala. She runs clinics there. And she's great. And we're talking about healthcare for a week because that's what the thing I'm writing is about. And I told her, I really do want to donate a kidney. And she said, oh yeah, you could do that. I said, I've been waiting for 10 years. I haven't heard back from this thing. And she goes, don't you live in New York? I said, yeah. She goes, go to NYU across the I'm on the west side. She goes across the city, go to NYU. And so I got back from that trip. I made a call to NYU and I don't know, within 5 days, I was in there getting tests.
Do you just call like the 1-800 number and say, hey, I'm trying to donate a kidney?
I called the kidney donation, whatever, or I sent an email saying I would like to do this or whatever. You check a box. I don't know. Everything's so easy now. And so, and then maybe I got a call from the person who became my coordinator, this wonderful woman, Angie Bello, and she took me through the process. It was quick. I could do the surgery whenever I wanted. I did it around my schedule, which strangely turned out to be a December 30th kidney donation.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. And so, but that's just because like I didn't have time off work, but otherwise I could have done it earlier, No, and it couldn't have been an easier process.
Who was the first person you told that you wanted to do this?
I told my friend Jim, and Jim told me, wait till your parents are dead.
Why that specific?
Because the idea is if you need your kidney, if your parents need a kidney, you should be there to give it to them.
Okay.
And the way the kidney donations work, though, you're probably aware, but I think most people are not aware that when you donate a kidney, anonymously, like I did, you can put a list of 5 people who will all rise to the top of the list. So there's a waiting list of like 90,000 people. But if I donate my kidney, I put my wife and kid and my parents, sister on this list. So that if they need a kidney, they're at the top of the list. The idea being they shouldn't suffer because I donated something, anonymously. Sure. And so that took care of that. And my friend Jim was, pacified immediately. I told my wife, and I thought, maybe she would make a bigger deal. She was like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. My wife works in social service. My wife's mother ran a domestic violence shelter for 35 years. They're all activists and do-gooders. My wife works, she's a teacher, but she started disability justice program. And, they're do-gooders. And so my wife probably looks at my thing as like kind of this, easy little thing, because she's doing more work and it's life's work for them. I told my parents and they were, I guess they were, like, they said, oh, that sounds really nice. My mom, tried to do a thing later, a few weeks later, like, I do want to talk to you about it. This kind of like, motherly
to try and
thing.
talk you out of it, or?
I think it was more just to like show a concern.
Got it.
I don't know if it was, she's very sweet. I don't know if it was like a performative thing, like not performative, but like, just felt like she had to.
Instinctual,
yeah. But goodness, after I did it, my whole family was like, this is amazing. We're all looking into it. My sister immediately spoke to a friend of her doctor, and because she was, thinking if she has children, when she should coordinate it. And my dad was saying, I'm thinking about doing it too. It really, because it was such a non-issue, and because I recovered so quickly and so, not perfectly, but no, perfectly. I recovered to be 100%. I don't know what the medical term for that is.
Do you have a cool scar?
I have like a 3 or 4 inch bikini line scar is what they call it. Okay. And then I have 3 holes, but they're tiny.
Nice. Okay.
The bigger one is where they pull the kidney out, but the other ones are where they do the laparoscopic operation. So anyway, because my family saw that the consequences were essentially zero. Fewer consequences of my wife having a C-section than women having a C-section, which we don't look at in the same way. We look at somebody donating their kidney. Oh my God, you went through surgery. But, if you have a C-section, it seems just like another option. But God, my wife had more trouble recovering from a C-section than I did my
Did you have to go through a screening process of any kind, making sure you're healthy, that you're not at risk for kidney stones that might hurt your other kidney or something like that?
This was the most amazing part of this, which, maybe you've heard of before, but I'd never considered the following. So I had a battery of tests done. You have, you go through, CAT scans of your entire torso. Tell me what the medical things are. I mean,
I don't know which, maybe MRI,
blood work, urinalysis for every possible thing. So, one of the things they say about kidney donations is that people who donate a kidney live longer than their non-donating peers. But that is just because it's a self-selecting process. So if you are in a position to donate a kidney, you're very healthy. Yeah. And therefore you live longer than your non-donating peers in the sense that you've been filtered out because of your good health. Right. So I got, a battery of tests done, multiple visits to the hospital. And the most interesting part of this entire experience for me was sitting in waiting rooms with people who were having the worst day of their lives. I'm sitting in waiting rooms getting an MRI of people who are finding out they have cancer. I'm sitting in waiting rooms to give blood multiple days with people who are there because they're worried they're dying, and I am there on this kind of like happy little quixotic jaunt of like doing this kind of fun thing because I have a week off now and I could do my blood work and I have, such good health that I could donate a kidney. And I was having the exact same day that somebody who's having the worst day of their lives is having. And so I was going through these like machines, these like, is it CAT scans? Is that where
CAT
you
scans
go in the
MRIs,
thing?
yeah.
Or MRIs?
The tubes, yeah. Was it really loud?
No.
Okay, so the CAT scan.
So I'm going through these machines and I'm looking up and there's this little light which tells you when to stay very still. So it's a red light and then with like a little picture of a person on it, an icon. Forgive this details, but it's really interesting.
Very interesting.
I'm going through these things. I'm looking at the red light and then it counts back from 3, 2, 1, and then it's a green light. Then it's a red light where you're supposed to not move for the 10 seconds, 20 seconds, right? And I'm looking at this light thinking, I might be the only person today looking at this light without panicking. Because I'm here for something good, And I remember thinking all of these things, this whole hospital system is designed, because it's a really wonderful facility to kind of make people feel a little more comfortable with getting the worst news of their life. And I'm there going through this kind of experience decades earlier than most people and in complete health without a care in the world. And I remember just thinking like, this is a fascinating existential experience to have, to essentially experience what it's like to have health trauma, to cosplay a health scare as a patient. Exactly. And it was fascinating. So I'm getting this CAT scan and they put this kind of warm dye in my arm. Is that right?
Yeah.
And everything I was experiencing was, oh, this is so interesting, this warm dye in my arm. And then my mind would switch of, oh my God, if I had cancer and I was waiting to see how big my tumor had increased, this warm dye would scare the shit out of me because it would further indicate how awful my situation is, that I had to have this warm dye, put in my arm and, your butt feels really weird for a few minutes and like weird stuff. And I remember just thinking, if I, had cancer or something really bad, all of these details would be staying with me as signs of terror. But for me, they were just signs of fascination and interest and curiosity. And I would ask the doctors, why does that dye feel weird? And they would say, oh, it has this thing in it, so it makes your butt feel weird. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting, And I realized they're probably not having this conversation a lot with people like me who are kind of just these like,
easygoing.
Yeah, kind of curious. No, it's so interesting.
How does that shift your perspective about healthcare in general?
Both my parents work in healthcare. My mom just got her doctorate in medical humanities. So she specifically works in the field of trying to make the healthcare industry have a human face. She teaches doctors how to give bad news while making eye contact and being sensitive rather than looking down at the floor and walking away. My dad teaches at Empire State College, which is part of the SUNY system, and he teaches people who work in the healthcare industry. He started like an MBA program at Empire State. So it's an MBA program. So a lot of his students are, for example, like people who work in healthcare as like nurses, but they want an MBA so they can move up the hospital system. So both my parents work in healthcare, and my mom is very specifically involved in trying to kind of put a human face to the healthcare industry. So when I'm looking at that red light and that green light, I'm thinking a little bit of like the, what is that woman who did the Temple Grandin? She Temple Grandin. She's this brilliant autistic woman who designed the factory farming system to make the cows less scared. Oh, okay. Anyway, I'm thinking about like how these things are designed to make the mammals feel less uncomfortable by them, and I guess it makes me think, wow, I'm very, very lucky to be in this country, to have my insurance, to have access to a place like NYU, which is so state of the art that you kind of can't believe that you're not in the future. I feel very lucky to be in a position to be able to donate a kidney when some people are born with diseases that make them suffer throughout their entire lives. So I felt very lucky. And then I also had this weird feeling of like, oh, I'm experiencing my death before my death. I'm experiencing what it feels like to go to a hospital a few days a week because you have to get more tests. I'm experiencing what it feels like to be worried about surgery, but I'm not worried about any of this stuff. And it was like a dry run for death is what I thought about it. And I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. I also know statistics about, for example, doctors like overwhelmingly not wanting to be kept alive with artificial means. And I was thinking a lot about that because I was just looking at the facilities and realizing, wow, we really could, it's almost possible to stay alive at our own expense. At the expense of not our finances, but that too, but our own expense of happiness,
comfort, quality of life.
Yeah. Awareness, consciousness. And so I was just kind of like, I was contemplating so many things, and it had a kind of like existentially meaningful experience.
Yeah, it seems really powerful. The effective altruism of it all. Did the notion of being in service to others help you in any way?
What do you mean help me?
You said that you were interested in this effective altruism.
Mm-hmm.
A big reason why people seek out altruism is because they feel like it helps with their anxieties, and it's also good to be in service in others in general as well.
Right.
But
you're
there
saying,
is a component that helps people feel more at ease with the struggles of today.
Yeah. That's why, it's almost selfish, but yeah, that's a part of why I did it. I want to have a connection to something bigger than myself. I noticed in my life, I am only at ease. We're talking, and I'm like, an anxious person or whatever. And the thing I described with my therapist is the one day I was like, what was the one time you're ever happy? And I was like, the only day I can remember being totally happy was my friend was moving, and I was boxing up his apartment. And we went downstairs and we got this like gross food. It was this little like hole in the wall Chinese restaurant with like with big plexiglass windows. It was like, and like we got the Chinese food at a place I normally wouldn't go to because it was it was like a hole in the wall kind of place or whatever. And then we went back up and ate really quick because we had to box up this stuff. And I just remember saying this was the absolute perfect day. And we determined that perhaps it was because I was thinking outside of myself. I was helping somebody else, and therefore, and it's not because I'm a great person. It's just because the way my mind is wired is I have this strong sense of guilt and that I'm going to be yelled at randomly. This is my two pervading problems in my head. I think I'm going to be yelled at randomly for something I wasn't aware of. Like, why are you wearing that shirt today? We're on camera. Why are you wearing a sweatshirt? Are you such an idiot? I have this fear like constantly. And I also have a strong sense of guilt for having luck, privilege, whatever, et cetera, all the reasons I should have guilt, history. And when I was boxing up my friend's stuff, all of that was gone. I was totally relieved because I was doing something for somebody else. He wasn't going to yell at me because I was there entirely in service of him and his boxes. And I didn't have any guilt because I was doing something for somebody else. And so what we kind of determined is when I'm doing stuff like that, I feel at ease with myself. I'm not talking, I feel thrilled. No, I don't have those feelings. I feel at ease. And that's my favorite thing. During the pandemic, we were living in Indiana where my wife grew up, and I was volunteering at my mother-in-law's domestic violence shelter. So I was painting every day, and I would listen to my podcast when I was painting the shelter every day because it's a big place. And I was fixing toilets and garbage disposals and kind of just doing handiwork that I was taught how to do during the pandemic. And it's also the other happiest period in my life. And again, it sounds like I'm trying to say, I'm a good person. So that's when it's not that. It's that it relieves me of all the anxieties I feel about myself. And so part of the reason I was attracted to kidney donation was a little bit of that, was a little bit of like, this is another opportunity for me to kind of get outside myself, do something where it won't trigger my guilt. I'm doing this interview with you now because I'm famous and it's triggering all sorts of guilty things. I'm hoping that people listen to this and hear me say that the consequences of my kidney donation were completely fine. None, zero. I would donate a kidney every single day if I had them, if I regenerated them. But I'm going to walk out of here going, I can't believe I just did an interview. I'm such a tool. I did an interview. Why did I talk about myself? I'm so obnoxious. What a narcissistic thing to have done. And so this is triggering for me too. Again, not that I need sympathy, but I'm expressing my brain.
I think it's totally understandable why you feel that way. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's the logical way to think about this scenario, and you're trying to be very empathetic and logical. So very reasonable that you're feeling that first and foremost. Second of all, the fact that you are describing this allows other people to feel seen in a way where perhaps they would consistently be thinking of themselves negatively and spiraling down a dark pathway. Because in reality, we're all seeking some sort of human connection. It's why a lot of these programs, AA as an example, are successful. Just the idea of someone else experiencing something that you have or defining it in a way that you've never heard can be quite powerful for some. So I actually am very grateful that you're putting yourself in this situation of discomfort
to
talk about these scenarios.
That's a nice way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I went to an AA meeting with a friend, and I was revelatory for me. I understood the appeal from the first second that it started. And it was the same thing of boxing the thing. It was like thinking outside yourself, commiserating with other people. Yeah, I understood the appeal. For me, it's when I could do something helpful, I don't know why. It makes me feel at ease.
It seems like you enter this flow state when you're thinking of yourself or larger than yourself in a given moment. Do you ever feel that flow state of where you return to perhaps a less anxious version of yourself when you're doing something you love? Sports is a common one for folks. You mentioned painting, doing something in service of others. Writing is a big example of that. Do you feel that then as well?
Yes. My other happy times, which are unrelated to social service, is I write, obviously, and when things are going well as a writer, that's another. It's both cathartic. I'm outside of my head. Oftentimes, acting, I'll get outside my head and it'll feel really good. I think I was attracted to acting a lot because it was like, again, I have this fear that I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm gonna be yelled at. Acting had this kind of very prescribed set of behaviors. I had to walk to this square and cry. And to me, it's like cathartic because I get to be emotional, and walking to the square, no one's going to yell at me. I know I'm supposed to walk to that square. That's where the box of light is, and I have to stand in the box of light. So I love that prescribed way. My character's being mean. I'm not being mean. My character's being mean, so I can almost exercise those weird feelings. Yeah. So part of that. Yes, part of the reason I like my work is because it allows me to have enough of a boundary where I'm not going to feel like I'm going to get yelled at. But of course, because my work is public and I get known for it, it does the other thing, which is like triggering the feelings of guilt that I'm.
It's why I empathize with this so much, and it's the reason why I love Lego so much. I like getting a set of instructions that I know I can't mess up if I follow the instructions.
Yeah.
Because it's predictive, but it's predictive in a way that's almost meditative, where I can just zone out and follow the instructions, and it's going to tell me step by step how to do it. Because in real life, every time you're making a decision, there is no stepwise manual for it.
How do you relate your interest in Legos and my interest in the things I talked about to the safetyism that you brought up a while ago?
I think safetyism.
I'm saying, do you think we like these things because our lives are safe? Or is this, let me phrase it. Do you think this is a new thing, wanting these instructions?
No, I think that is a natural human state to seek order. And I even zoom out further to think about how this impacts how we think about fairness. One of the things you'll see in kids, especially as someone who sees kids of all ages and watching their development, how they think about fairness and how they think sharing is important, or this person did this and it's unfair. Kids will oftentimes use that vocabulary very early on before it's even something that they've seen replicated in front of them, where it's a natural thing to seek order, to seek fairness. Why kids love playing with blocks and putting blocks into different shapes, because we like seeing that order. It feels good. It strikes the heart of our neurons, if you will.
Oh, that's fascinating.
To combine the organs.
You brought up social media a few times when we first started talking. Does the chaos of that make us long for that more? Or is the social media a form of putting boxes?
I think it's an artificial version of that, where that neuronal circuit is being hijacked by social media.
How so?
Because we love the order and we love feeling this rush of neurotransmitters when we get the box in the right square. And then social media will give that to us by giving us the alert and trigger a similar response.
Oh, but you're saying hijacked. So the implication is it's doing it kind of insidiously
it's doing it in a way where it's self-serving to itself and its own survival.
Is the Lego company not doing the same thing?
The Lego company is probably doing that to some level because obviously they're selling you a product, but I feel like it's less malicious because it's clear what they're selling you. And to me as a doctor, when a doctor, I will oftentimes judge doctors who oversell supplements and overpromise supplements. And it's not because they're selling a supplement, because in reality, they could sell a supplement that's reasonable. Patient might need vitamin D supplementation, iron, if they're iron deficient, anemia. So there are reasons why. But if they're doing it without informed consent, by over promising things and deceiving the person, that's where I view it as a problem. So the Lego purchase to me is less deceptive because you know what you're getting when you buy a Lego.
Right.
They know that you get joy and they continue making Legos.
Right.
Social media companies, like, what are they trying to sell me? What are they trying to get me to do?
Oh,
And it's less clear in that way.
I see. Yeah, the social contract is not
as
earnest.
self-evident.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And also, I think it's done in a way where Lego, you could only spend so much time doing Legos, but you can really miss out on life by being on social media and the digital ethos.
Yeah, although I'm sure the Lego company would want you to spend more time with Legos.
Yeah. The thing with Legos, though, I don't know. There's a rate limiting step there of some kind. Of your fingers getting tired because there's a physical.
And then you step on one and you hate it for a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And your mom would probably be best to talk about this as how medical humanity is impacting our world with the intervention of AI coming into play.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if she's ever discussed.
I think she got her
with you.
degree prior to like any of the large language models.
Thank God, because we need people like her more than ever to remind us of how important the medical humanities are.
I'm sure you're incredibly cynical about people self-diagnosing on ChatGPT.
No.
You're not?
No, I love it.
Oh, I was going to actually challenge you if you were. So I was going to ask you. No. I was sorry, not challenge you. Who am I? I just mean like,
you should challenge.
No, I guess what I mean is
A good podcast is all about challenge.
I guess what I meant is like I would have said, I'm sure you're probably cynical, but don't you think there's also some great benefit? Because I notice like sometimes I'll be totally paranoid about something and like 99 out of 100 times the internet tells me, no, relax. It's definitely not that.
Yeah. Does that help when the internet tells you that?
Of course.
Does it help more when the internet tells you that or when a human doctor tells you that?
Yeah, a doctor, obviously a doctor, but
Is obviously, I don't know, some people believe the internet more than the doctor.
I'll put it this way. I like love information and I love going like down a rabbit hole with what the thing is. So, I have a mole on my knee or something like that. Is it cancer? You write into ChatGPT, is it cancer or something? And it you can go for 5 hours and I find the information to be, okay, maybe doctors will hate me saying this, but like I find the information to be really like satisfying because it'll tell me like 9 times, it will say, most likely it's X, Y, and Z. And if, and I like kind of doing that. Is that bad?
I don't know if it's necessarily bad because you have to ultimately make the decision if it's bad.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying it and it's scratching some sort of itch for you and you don't see
Maybe
any
that's
problems
it.
with the result of
Maybe
it.
it's entertainment. Maybe
Yeah.
that's kind of why I'm on it.
Or perhaps soothing. It's soothing
Yeah.
to be able to have your questions answered.
Yeah. I, of course, will go to a doctor, but I also recognize that like I'm lucky to be able to go to a doctor. Like that's a kind of lucky thing to be able to very quickly make an appointment. I have good health insurance through my union. My friend doesn't have good health insurance through his situation. And so for him going to a doctor is quite a difficult task.
The health insurance industry in the U.S. is absolute poop, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
I'm curious in going through your surgery, because you said some really powerful words at the Time Magazine event where you said that you don't believe people who will donate a kidney ever need to think about it. So that your hope is by being on this Time Magazine list, presenting your speech. And I encourage everyone to go on social media on their Instagram and see your words because they did publish it. Why do you think that there's this notion that when you hear about potentially donating a kidney, you either are all in or all out right away?
This is a totally uneducated, unscientific analysis of my experiences speaking to people and watching a documentary where they interviewed lots of people who were donating their kidneys.
And what was that? What did you learn from that?
What I learned is that everybody I spoke to who did it, who came out of the woodwork to talk to me about it, had the exact same experience. I heard about it and I signed up. I got a text message from my friend's little sister. She said, "Can I have your brother's number?" So she texted me. She said, "I heard about it and I heard about it and I went to the hospital that week and they said I had to wait till I turned 18 or 25. And so on my 25th birthday, my blood work appointment was scheduled for my 25th birthday.
Wow.
On my birthday, I went to the hospital to start the blood work to donate a kidney. And then I watched this movie called Confessions of a Good Samaritan by Penny Lane, great documentary filmmaker. And she interviewed all these people. They all said the word no-brainer And then I looked back at the first interview I gave about it, and the headline was, Jesse donate kidney, says it's a no-brainer. They all said it to the point where she cut together a montage of them all saying no-brainer, which is not like an expression I ever use. I come from academics. We never use the word no-brainer.
Yeah.
And so like, it's just, so what I thought I learned from this, again, unscientific study and unprofessional
Observation.
poll is that people who are inclined to do this thing have no fear about it or question about it. And the people who are not inclined to do it are never going to get there. This is what I learned. Now, I'm sure there's a gray area where some people are nervous, but they realize maybe it would be good and they finally do it. Or their uncle had a kidney transplant, so they are feeling a little more comfortable with it, even though they have all the same nerves that somebody who would never do it would do it. So a personal experience would make them do it. But for people like me who do it like anonymously, it's almost like this obvious activity. There's a guy who said in this documentary, he said, when I heard about kidney donations, my first thought was, why is there not a line down the block of the hospital? And this was my thought too. I could not believe I got an appointment. I would just think everybody would want to do this kind of thing. However, my sisters believe that why would anybody eat meat? Have you seen the pictures? My wife would think, why would anybody not want to be a teacher? Do you see how many students need guiding?
Right.
So I think we all have the thing we think is obvious.
So do you think I'm a bad person for not donating my kidney?
No, because I think you're a better person than me. You've devoted your life to being a doctor. I devoted my life to being in violent movies. I'm far worse than you. I just think that for whatever reason, the way my brain is designed, this to me is like a non-thing.
And weird that it's not a non-thing, because my patients who have a history and they label themselves as an anxious person get very worried about being put under anesthesia. In fact, I just had a patient the other day who unfortunately was diagnosed with a tongue cancer, and young patient. And I was doing his pre-surgical clearance in addition to the initial counseling of the diagnosis. He had to reschedule his appointment numerous times, even on the day of surgery, being in the surgery suite, because of his anxiety of the fear of not wanting to, of the fear of not waking up post-surgery.
Oh my goodness.
But you never felt that.
Can I tell you a weird story?
Yeah.
I was doing this movie, Now You See Me, and in the movie, we're performing on stage, and then I play magician, and then we rise up to the rafters. So I'm in a harness because my character is supposed to rise up to the rafters, and it's this huge theater in New Orleans, a really high, many stories high. And they pull us up, and then they said, it's lunchtime for the actors. And I asked the guys who were doing the wires, they weren't going to lunch yet. I said, can I just stay up here for a little bit? It's so cool. Okay, so I got to stay up at this thing, at the top of this thing, and I was like, this is amazing. I get to look out. I can see everything in this theater. It's amazing. It's so beautiful. And then I realized I have a fear of heights, a terrible fear. If there was a balcony, we're on the floor right now recording this. If there was a balcony, I could not go outside. It would hurt it hurts my toes even thinking about going outside. I was thinking as I was suspended in the air, why do I not have a fear here? Then there was another scene a few weeks later where we're supposed to jump off a building, and some of the actors are really nervous because we're jumping down into a mat, but it's on the side of a building. It was a little nerve-wracking. And I love it. I'm first over the building. I jump down. And I'm like, well, that's so weird. I don't have a fear of this either. And I realized that when I'm doing something with a purpose, I have no fears at all. When I'm doing something for some reason, I have no fears. My fears are entirely fantastical. I have the fantastical fear that if I walk out onto a balcony floor, I'm going to be compelled to jump for some dumb reason because I can, and I'm going to be compelled to jump off the building. But if I'm in a scene and it takes place on the balcony, I have this thing to focus on. I'm doing it for some other reason. So the fantastical nonsense in my head doesn't get triggered. And so when I came back from New Orleans, I realized if I donate blood, I might not have a fear of needles. I used to not like it when they had to do blood.
Sure.
So I go to the Red Cross or whatever in New York City. It's not the Red Cross. It's a local
blood
thing.
centers or something.
I go to the thing, I donate blood, and I love it. I love it. And I'm like, when can I come back? Like 52 days, 56 days or something. I schedule it, 56 days. I'm going back there and I want to do the double blood donation. Yeah. No fears at all. I love it. I love it. And so I realized, and then I would get blood drawn for medical purposes, no fear anymore. Wow. Or still a little fear from that, but basically I got over the fear, What I discovered in myself is that when I have some purpose, I have no anxieties. I was taking care of somebody when they were dying, over the course of months. And I remember not having any anxieties. I have to call and I had to lie about getting an oxygen machine because we needed extra oxygen. The doctors wouldn't give us the prescription for the extra oxygen. So I had to call and say we lost a tank. I don't lie. I don't like to lie. I called and I was like, we lost the tank. I could do an accent. We lost the tank. I'm so sorry. We need to get a new tank. It's immediate. I realized I had no anxiety at all because I had some purpose. Whereas normally if I'm lying to somebody I never met, I'm terrified. They're going to find out or yell at me. Anyway, with the kidney thing, the exact same thing. I had zero anxiety about getting the surgery, zero anxiety about getting the tests, the blood work, the urine stuff, whatever, going under, the anesthesia. Just zero, nothing. I don't know why.
I have a question I want to ask, but I fear that it's too existential to ask.
That's my favorite kind of question.
Okay. You say that when you have purpose, you feel less anxiety, so you're able to conquer your fears or go through difficult moments. And I know I've said I relate many times on this podcast, but I relate to that as well. I have the same fear of heights that you have, that suddenly an earthquake will happen while I'm on the side of the thing and I'm going to fall, or the wind will blow too hard in a way. Yeah. I also have those irrational fears. And yet I flew with the United States Air Force Thunderbirds in an F-16 pulling 9.3 Gs.
Wow.
Because I needed to do it for the video.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for the views, basically.
And how did you feel?
I was nervous, but I was like, we have to do it. The guys were waving to me as the plane was taking off. And I was like, yeah, we just have to do this.
Of course, right.
So knowing that purpose makes you less anxious and not worried, does that mean in your everyday life, when you are very nervous, very anxious, that you haven't yet found your purpose?
Yeah, I mean, that's not too existential. Yeah, that's exactly what I think about, is when I don't have something to do for an hour. That's when I feel worse. I don't feel worst when I'm like, I've been in really high pressure situations as a performer. I just did a one-man show a block away from here. And I felt like incredibly nervous, but I also felt like I believe in the show, that I wrote about a personal experience and I want to do it. And it overrides that. I used to, for years I would perform in my own plays. And what I always said to myself is I am so nervous before a show, but I would feel worse sitting at home at 8 o'clock and doing nothing. That, I need to have some kind of purpose. And if it could benefit somebody else, I feel even better, because it takes that second thing away from me, which is like, I'm not doing this for selfish reasons. I'm not going to get yelled at.
Well, then does being a celebrity help in all of this? Because as a celebrity, you bring so much joy to people, right? Like an average person walking into a room, people usually don't light up and get excited. You walk into a room, I saw people's reaction at Time Magazine. I felt my own reaction. Very excited to meet you, seeing you on screen before. There's familiarity. Do you have an advantage in bringing joy to the world because of your career?
Okay, so we met each other at this like Time Magazine thing, and after it ended, people were coming up to me for like another half hour to like talk and take a picture or whatever like that, because I was like the actor in the room. I don't filter that as, wow, look at all this good I'm bringing to these people. That's not how I metabolize what's happening there. The way I think about it is, they saw me on a TV show, they want to take a picture to show their friends. Do they like me? I don't know.
But that's joy you're bringing them.
It's too abstract an idea. Am I bringing them joy? Listen, I think a lot of people, when they meet me, they want to take a picture to show their friends that they met somebody famous. They might say, look, they might text them with a picture saying, look, I ran into that guy you hate. That guy we make fun of when we watch the TV show or whatever. I got a picture with that idiot. Because I recognize that fame is not correlated to value. You know what I mean? And
unnatural to some degree.
Oh, it's totally unnatural, of course. But I don't think people coming up to me, it doesn't make me think, I'm a good person. Look at what I've done, that this person is wanting to talk to me. That's just not how I perceive it.
But the fact that an average person will go and donate their kidney and they'll feel good about it.
Yeah.
But you can come on a podcast and there's a world where thousands more, I mean, maybe I'm thinking too far, but millions might see this and then go, I want to also donate my kidney. Isn't that tremendous value?
Listen, I really hope people do that. There are 90,000 people on the wait list for a kidney that are in various stages of real suffering. I mean, if you know people who are on dialysis or need a kidney, people are at death's door. My friend's dad died during COVID, needed a kidney. I have a very good friend who knows that his kids are going to also need kidneys because he has a genetic thing, and the horror of a parent with young children who realized too late that their kids are going to need this thing. So that's a real thing. And I hope and pray that people listening to this will donate their kidneys, or people not listening to this will donate their kidneys through osmosis. I really hope that happens. However, I find a little bit doing this interview in a way devalues the thing I've done. And sorry, this is not a criticism of this platform. What I mean by that is, when we donate money and tell everybody we donated money, it starts to, I think, make that currency go down a little bit, I don't know why that is. I just have that instinct. And maybe it's a pretentious instinct I should shrug off. But that's my feeling a little bit, is that me talking about me doing this a little bit devalues the act. That's how I feel a little bit. It's just my kind of instinct, right? It might be wrong and it might come out of guilt.
I think it's a good instinct.
What?
I think it's a healthy instinct that you have that you're trying to not, at least you don't want to be perceived in that way. Whether you think it's more about the perception of it all or genuinely how you are perceiving it?
This internal ickiness, I feel. No, the perception is good. Oh, look, this actor did a nice thing or whatever. No, it's entirely, I feel incredibly icky. I don't know how to articulate it more than that.
I'm grateful for you overcoming that ick to get this message out.
Well, as you know from our messages, I was like incredibly hesitant. I've turned down every interview that I've been asked to do, and I've been asked to do tons of interviews and speak at things, and I don't do it. But when I met you and I saw what you do, I thought, well, actually this, and we had a good discussion, and I thought, well, actually this platform is probably most likely to affect people, because you said, not only is the size of your audience big, but you said people are health curious. And I thought, you have a young audience of people who are health curious. Those are the people who are going to hear this and think, oh, I'm that person. And I think most people are going to hear this or listen or watch this or whoever people receive this information and say, oh, wow, that's interesting that he did that. I would never want to do that. But there's going to be maybe a lot of people who are going to say, oh, I didn't know that's possible. Oh, and look, this guy who looks like me doesn't seem like a superhero person. Whatever, this guy who looks like me, who has my levels of anxiety, my levels of concern about things, my levels of medical panic, did it and experienced no consequences. I will say I did experience one pain, which was a day and a half after the surgery. I started feeling real pain in my shoulders for about 2 or 3 days. And that pain came from...
position?
Not from the position, from the gas that they put in the laparoscopic procedure to fill you up a little bit.
Yep.
The gas travels up to your shoulders. And so my biggest pain out of this entire process, getting cut open or organ removed, none of that bothered me. I feel nothing from it. My scars look really, really integrated into my otherwise perfect torso. The biggest inconvenience was that I felt almost like, almost like a pain in your muscles, like after you, throw a football after you haven't thrown a football in a while or sleep on it wrong. That was my biggest pain.
So, mild soreness.
Yes, and this is what I would warn people about. And my warning really is more indicative of how easy everything else was.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And I'm hoping that message lands well for people. And even if they choose not to do it, they tell someone about it that perhaps can be influenced, kind of like a down the line process.
Yeah. I find this to be kind of like a very awkward aspect of me doing this, is that I know I can make an impact, like a practical impact, especially because I seem like a regular person. I seem like an average person. I'm not somebody who jumps off skyscraper. I'm not somebody who's like looking at I'm a worried person, and I think, yes, that could inspire people, that word, in a way that, or inform people in a way that I was informed by this podcast.
Yeah. My final question to you is there a world where for Jesse, Hollywood is no longer a thing?
Well, Hollywood itself is becoming less of a thing, unfortunately, because the industry is leading.
Broadly.
Hollywood, the way I think about the arts is kind of, it's what you make of it. The same time I had this movie Now You See Me 3 come out, which is this big international kind of, Hollywood style production. I was doing my one-man show about a guy who has trouble connecting to his newborn baby at a 200-seat theater down the block from here. The arts are what you make of it. Some people want to do the Now You See Me, and then they also want to speak at an advertising convention and do a toothpaste commercial. For me, it's like, oh, that's the Now You See Me thing. I get to do this thing, and maybe I'll do a toothpaste thing. I don't know. It's what you make of it.
You like the variety of it.
I love the variety, and I like that the arts are the arts and not the industry of the arts. The arts for me is, I do little projects that no one knows about. I directed a play in a, tiny theater that my wife's friend wrote. That's what I love about my job. And so, yeah, it's all connected to Hollywood in some vague way. But I love that I don't feel beholden to an industry.
Cool. Well, look, I seriously thank you for coming on the show and taking the time out to put out this important message, despite all the anxieties or nerves that you felt before
it did feel like it felt like packing up my friend's house. So thank you.
Perfect. And we're going to be excited to speak with a physician from NYU that will take us through the organ transplantation process and some of the great processes that they have in place there?
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Jesse.
much, Dr. Mike.
And now to help us better understand the clinical side of organ transplantation, we have Dr. Robert Montgomery, the director of NYU Langone's Transplant Institute and recipient of a heart transplant from the very same program. Trust me when I tell you, this interview floored me. From learning his heart stopped 7 separate times, to receiving CPR for 40 minutes in the audience of a Broadway musical, to the future of kidney transplants from pigs being used inside humans. Wow. Dr. Montgomery, take it away.
Sir, what does your day-to-day look like when you're working at NYU?
So, my sort of work life is pretty complicated because I wear a number of different hats that sort of mirror the main mission areas of an academic institution. So I teach. I oversee a big residency program and medical students. We teach in the operating room. We do didactic sessions as well. I do research. So significant amount of my time is innovating and doing translational research, which means, bench to bedside and bedside to bench kind of work. And then I'm a transplant surgeon, so I spend a lot of time, doing that, taking care of patients.
Yeah, what between the balance of all of those, do you like that you have different hats that you wear, or do you favor one over the other?
I love that I do all those different things, and I like to, in the span of a day, to move from one thing to the next in an effortless way.
For sure. And, we have a very health curious audience, some people who are aspiring physicians, other healthcare providers. How does one become a transplant surgeon?
Yeah, so you have to, do medical school, and then usually most medical students don't know what they want to do.
Right.
But at some point, when you're a third or fourth year medical student, you get exposed to the different specialties in medicine and surgery. And so you get into the operating room and you kind of think, wow, these
that
are my
what you
people.
felt?
Yeah. I felt like I could connect, best with surgeons. And I just love the idea that you go into this room, you do a task, you complete it, you get immediate feedback on how you did. So it's very different than sort of managing a chronic disease. And then you form, a bond with that patient that's pretty intense because you've actually been inside them, and there's not too many things like that. And what I love about transplantation, which is kind of different than a lot of other areas in surgery, is that you also have this longitudinal relationship with the patient, because we follow our patients, over the lifespan of their organ. So all of that appealed to me, the surgery part, and then the idea of having a close relationship with your patients over time. And I kind of knew right away when I first was exposed to surgery that this was something that sort of clicked with me.
And was it transplant that right away clicked, or just
No,
general surgery?
not necessarily. General surgery is what you're exposed to now. I went to the University of Rochester, and there was a really good transplant surgeon who did kidney transplants that I did get exposed to as a medical student. And I thought that was a very elegant operation.
How so?
Well, there's basically a number of different steps that that are very clear. You have to sew 2 blood vessels, between the donor organ and the recipient, and then you have to join the ureter, which comes with the donor kidney, to the recipient's bladder, and it's just you almost feel like you should have a tuxedo on when you're doing it, because it's just a really elegant operation, very pretty to watch, I think. And that's how it struck me, like right away, that a liver transplant can be very long. It can be very bloody, and it, there's a lot of steps to it, and it's, I think for the uninformed or the novice, it looks pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed doing that until I decided not to continue doing liver transplants. So, but once you finish your residency then in general surgery, then you do a 2-year fellowship in transplantation surgery, where you really, learn the transplant procedures.
Did anything shock you in going through that education of how transplants are done, how transplants are viewed by society? Does anything stand out in your mind from those couple of years?
What the most shocking thing is how sick people are when they go into the operating room, and how they almost immediately emerge in a position of health and improvement. It's so striking. And, particularly, I think, patients who are getting a liver transplant who are really kind of on death's door. We have dialysis, which is for kidney disease, which is kind of a poor substitute for, your own kidneys, and certainly not by any measure not as good as a kidney transplant, but it can tide people over for a period of time and keep them in reasonable shape. It's, if you talk to people who are on dialysis, it's a miserable day-to-day existence. It really just takes over, their whole lives. But, heart transplants, lung transplants, livers, these things where there's not kind of a good substitution, they get very ill, and then suddenly, they are transformed during, the time that you're putting the organ in.
Sure.
So it's an extraordinary thing to see.
And what encouraged you or got you curious about doing research in the field, not just being a transplant surgeon?
Yeah, the immune system was always very interesting to me for some reason. No particular connection, from my early life, but I started doing research actually in high school in immunology, and so it all sort of came together because it's so critical for transplantation. It's all about kind of holding the immune system at bay so it doesn't attack the new organ.
Were you experiencing in your practice rejections, and that's what led you to want to do these bits of research?
So, I think that, immunology is something that is so fundamental to transplantation that we all, those of us who go into this field, have to have some kind of a basic understanding of immunology. My main research interests have been, for the first part of my career, in trying to create more living donation opportunities for patients and try to expand living donation, because it seemed like the area that was most expandable,
right,
if you will, because deceased donation, it's really been a tough nut to crack to figure out how to get more people to donate organs after their death.
What's the rate limiting step there?
I mean, I think kind of old ideas, ancient ideas about the body and about death, and not necessarily people think that there's we come into this world with these organs and we should leave them.
I see.
So
like a
leave with
cultural belief.
Yeah, I mean, it goes, I think, back to the Egyptians, and these are kind of old ideas that somehow find their way into our minds, and so some people just have this immediate reaction when you talk to them about donation, and people don't like to talk about their own death.
Yeah, it gives new meaning to the term organ rejection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, the most important thing about deceased donation, donating after you die, is letting your family know that it's something you want to do, right? And I think it's a kitchen table conversation that often never occurs. And so your family is left in this terrible spot of, emoting over your loss and not really knowing exactly what your wishes were unless you've made that clear. So I always say, yes, it's really important to register, because then it couldn't be more clear as a donor. But I think even more important than that is to have that, what I call a kitchen table conversation with your family, so they really know how you feel about donation after death. And it also then, I think, it's an opportunity for them to talk about what they want as well. And, for whatever reason, the donation rate from people who have died, at least early in my career, for years really didn't change much. And so I saw living donation as that opportunity. And so I became very interested in how to make it easier to donate. And that's how the laparoscopic nephrectomy for donation came from the work that we were doing, talking to people who had come, and wanted to donate their organs, but during the process decided not to. And we did these questionnaires, and the number one reason was the magnitude of the operation and the recovery period. It wasn't at all unusual before we used minimally invasive laparoscopic procedures to remove the kidney, the type of procedure that Jesse had, that the recipient would go home from the hospital before their donor would, because it was this huge incision on their flank. We'd remove the 11th rib. It was a big deal to donate an organ. So introducing that new operation, which is now the standard throughout the world, was something that I was involved in. We were a team that brought that forward. And then this idea of swapping kidneys, because if you take any two people like you and I, there's a 35% chance that we would not be compatible either by blood or tissue. And so if you were my only donor, then I'd have to get on the deceased donor list, right? So we did two things. We figured out a way to remove the harmful antibodies that really create that incompatibility through a procedure called plasmapheresis. And then we also figured out a way to get around the incompatibility by saying, okay, let's say the two of us are incompatible. We find another pair that have the opposite incompatibility, and then that the donor from that pair gives to me, and the donor, and then you would give to the recipient in that pair. So it's a swap. And then to that, we made the tweak of starting a chain of transplants with somebody like Jesse Eisenberg, who is a non-directed donor, so doesn't have someone in mind that they want to give a kidney to. They can start a chain where they give their kidney to someone who has an incompatible donor, and then that donor gives to somebody who's on the list. And you get two transplants instead of one from, in this case, Jesse's act of kindness and humanity. And then you can extend those chains as long as you want. And that's a concept that we came up with, and that's been responsible for 11,000 living donor transplants that wouldn't have occurred otherwise.
And there's, Jesse mentioned 90,000 people actively on a wait list for a kidney. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be weighing on you.
Yeah,
in some ways.
and only 1/3 of them will ever receive a transplant
because of the length of time it takes to get one.
because of the length of time, in the impact of dialysis. Dialysis is very hard on the body, and people, start to develop what we call comorbidities or other diseases. Cardiovascular disease gets accelerated, and so they get too sick to benefit from a transplant or die. So 2/3 of the patients never make it across the finish line. But, when you talk about the list, you're talking really about a relatively small part of the impact of organ failure.
How so?
Only 10% of the people with organ failure, and you can take any organ, heart, lung, kidney, liver, ever make it onto the list. 10%. And then only 1/3 of them actually receive a transplant. And that means that every year we're transplanting about 3% of the total number of people who could potentially benefit.
Why do only 10% make it?
Because we don't have enough organs. We're in a place of
Meaning
rationing.
onto the list itself. Is
Right.
it also
So we're always thinking,
who's a good candidate?
who is a good candidate? And what does that mean? Who's likely to benefit from the most from a transplant?
God, that's a heavy decision to make.
If we had unlimited...
Who makes that decision?
I mean, it gets made at many steps. People unconsciously know that, it's difficult to receive an organ. So it starts in people's own minds.
Right.
And, maybe they're older, maybe they're frail. And then it's, for kidney, it can be at the dialysis center, to the point where they're not encouraged to go and seek out information about transplantation because somebody says, oh, I don't think you're a good candidate or you probably wouldn't benefit. And so, and then once, you do go to a center to get evaluated for a transplant, we kind of have a sense of how likely it is that you're going to be able to wait, 5 or 6 years and to, be in a position to benefit. So these things are, it's just baked into the process now that we're rationing this. It's the most highly rationed thing in medicine that works. Like if we were talking about a cancer drug, it would be a completely different conversation. We would be sure that that was available to our patient. Even if it only extended their life for a month, they would get that cancer drug, right? But in organ transplantation, it's a very different thing.
Yeah. Is the process of the laparoscopic minimally invasive kidney transplant for a donor as easy as Jesse makes it sound?
Yeah, I think Jesse, is a very unique person. I mean, it's a major operation. I think we're at a point now in the development of the operation that it's much easier, if you will. It doesn't require as much time out of work. It doesn't have a major impact on your health, perhaps as it did 20 years ago. But it's something that one has to take very seriously. Sure. It's a big deal to donate a kidney, but people do it every day, and it's it has such an amazing impact on the recipient that it saves their life. I mean, just
literally
when you think about what I just explained in terms of the the fact that we have such a scarcity of organs, to save a life by adding an organ to the mix it's just an amazing thing.
How early in the process do you first meet with the donors?
Well, so, if somebody wants to donate either altruistically, I mean, I think all donors are altruistic, right? and perhaps a better term is a non-directed donor, like Jesse, who really doesn't know someone who needs an organ, but just out of the goodness of their heart, knows they have two organs or two kidneys, and you only need one. And then, so that they would either, present to something like the National Kidney Registry or to a transplant center and say, I'd like to donate an organ. If it's somebody that then generally the recipient will, go to get registered at a transplant center and then inform the center that they have a potential donor, will give the recipient a phone number that they can give to, the candidate donor, and then they get in touch with us, because we keep those, two processes completely separate, because we want to ensure that, first of all, the donor, is well informed, really understands what's involved, is completely on board with it, because obviously you can imagine, if it's a family member, they might be feeling some pressure to donate. So we have to go through all that and make sure, unravel that.
You've seen that play out?
Yeah, sure. Wow. And that's why it's kept completely separately, because the recipient just finds out, the donor was cleared for donation, or they weren't cleared for donation. They never find out why, right?
Okay.
So
you give them a backstory cover there.
Well, just by saying that they weren't cleared for donation. Those are kind of the two ways that, depending on whether you're a non-directed donor or you're connected with a recipient, how you get into the system. But then we might uncouple you again if you're getting a kidney pair donation where you go into one of these swap pools, right?
And maybe my head is still in Hollywood because Jesse was just here. But is there ever a world where someone comes in and you worry that there's some ulterior motive? Someone is paying someone. Is that unethical? Is that disallowed? What's the process with that?
Yeah, all of those things, unethical, not allowed. It's pretty rare. But
globally, this happens though, right?
Yes. Yeah. I would say in this country, in the US, it's pretty rare. But, we have donor advocates, sort of third parties that interact with the donor and have a series of questions that they ask. And so that is vetted, and honestly, if that's the case, and again, it's pretty rare, it's usually pretty obvious,
right,
right away. But yeah, it's illegal.
Yeah.
We do compensate donors for their expenses in the process of donation, travel. There are various different funds, that are out there through the government, through some of our societies that, just make it so that the donor doesn't have to, spend their own money going through the process of doing this wonderful thing for society.
Yeah, maybe this is an incredibly dumb question, so I apologize ahead of time, but why is it that folks are allowed to sell certain bodily fluids, but they can't sell their kidney?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is an ongoing debate.
Oh, it is? Okay.
I think that, it's actually something that isn't completely resolved, but it's illegal. It was part of what's called NOTA, the original legislation that went through in the 1980s that, set up the governance for our system of organ donation. But it does come up and it is debated. I think, it's a bigger deal than, donating eggs or sperm or something like that, it's the operation is of a greater magnitude.
Well, wouldn't that mean that compensation is even more appropriate in those scenarios?
I mean, there is definitely a school of thought, that this could really change this scarcity of organs if we moved in that direction. But I think the idea of donation and the idea that you're doing this to help someone, there's not some monetary reward that you're getting that might be coercive.
Sure.
In many cases would be coercive.
Yeah.
And might someone who's vulnerable.
Yeah, on a societal level, it could be quite destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this fear that a lot of my patients have when we discuss whether or not they should be an organ donor, when we're filling out forms, their posts, end of life care, et cetera, that they believe if they write that they wish to be a deceased organ donor, that they will not get good quality care.
Yeah.
Why do people believe
it's
that?
kind of it's like those old thoughts that we were talking about earlier, that because the idea that it's sort of in the vapors that when there is an opportunity for donation, why wouldn't that influence people's thoughts, right? Who are caring for you? But the truth is that the people who are trying to save your life are a completely different team, totally disassociated from those who are involved in organ allocation, who would come in at a much later point in this process after you've already been declared brain dead, or after the decision, has already been made about what's, going to happen after your death. So look, I've been in this, in medicine for a long time, and I've been in medicine longer than I've been in transplantation. And that really does not happen. I mean, that is really an unfounded fear, but it is, a fear that people have.
Yeah. Do you ever go to dinner parties and people find out what you do and they say, "Oh, I would never do that because of this"?
Sure.
Yeah.
And many other reasons.
Yeah. What other reasons do people have?
Well, what I mentioned earlier, which is what if I need my organs,
Right.
after I die?
Do you get into those debates ever? Or?
Yeah, sure. I try to inform people, about, truth and what's fact and what's fiction.
That's more important than ever these days.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Although I've tried to put myself in those shoes by having debates with those who are anti-vaccine, and some people in the medical community say that we shouldn't be doing that. So I'm always curious how medical professionals feel about whether or not we should be debating topics like this, where there's a clear scientific answer, but perhaps societally there's disagreement.
Yeah. I mean, vaccines are, that's healthcare for people who are living. There's something quite different about the decision to donate organs at the end of life.
But not with altruistic or the type of donation Jesse did.
True.
In those cases. But
we have great data on, so there's been almost 100,000 people who have donated kidneys. And so we have longitudinal, really good data about the safety of donation.
Jesse also mentioned that he was able to put people on a list that if his loved ones ever needed a kidney because he already donated his. What happens if Jesse's, God forbid, his kidney fails and he needs a kidney donation? What happens then?
Yeah, so that rarely happens, but it does happen. Obviously, there's a certain level of, renal failure that we all, are subject to, that a certain risk. And then the other thing is that sometimes if you donate to a family member, and they have some genetic predisposition, then that could affect you later in life. Now, we really know a lot about those things now, so we're, able to screen during the donation process for the vast majority of those things. But yeah, so there are some people who develop renal failure who have donated an organ, and they go right to the top of the list. Okay. So if they need a kidney, they'll get one, and they don't have these long waiting periods. Mm-hmm. So that's already baked into the system.
And transplantation is obviously your passion, your career, but it's also near and dear to your heart in many ways.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I've had a heart transplant. I'm coming up on my 8th anniversary.
Wow.
I have a genetic disorder. My dad died at age 52, got sick when I was 14 years old. We didn't know then that what the disease is called dilated cardiomyopathy. We didn't know that it's the disease of the heart muscle rather than the coronary arteries. When people have heart attacks, it's usually because their coronary arteries are blocked. This is a disease of the muscle, but it can affect the electrical system and cause short circuits in the electrical system, which can cause sudden deaths, cardiac arrests. So my dad died. We thought it was a post-viral type of cardiomyopathy. Mm-hmm. And then when I was an intern at Johns Hopkins in surgery, got a phone call from my sister-in-law who told me that my 35-year-old brother, Rich, had just died while water skiing.
Oh my God.
And had a cardiac arrest. I had his heart sent to the pathologists at Hopkins, and they said, this is the same disease that your father had. Mm. And so we knew we had, a problem, big problem. And then about 8 years later.
Well, before we go 8 years later, how does that hit for you? You find this out and you're worried about your own heart.
Yeah. So, I got on a treadmill and I had a very dangerous rhythm.
On a stress test.
On a stress test. And this was in the 1980s, the late 1980s. And at Johns Hopkins, where I was, the implantable defibrillator had just been invented. I was in the first 1,000 people to receive that device. They told me that I was at high risk for a sudden death, and that given the family history and the fact that it was clear that I had the disease, mm-hmm. that I needed this. I was the first surgeon in the world to receive one of these, and they told me it was the end of my surgical career. And that they were worried that the equipment that we use in the operating room, one particular piece of equipment called the electric cautery, which is vital to sealing blood vessels while you're doing surgery, that the electrical noise from that would probably set the device off, and that's a
concern.
1,000 volts of electricity, right? And so they said you should probably think about another career entirely.
Oh my God!
I had good support, good mentors who I was about to go off actually to do my research years at Oxford and work on my PhD in immunology. Mm-hmm. And, my boss, the chair of surgery, said, well, let's see how things go over the next few years. And after I had the device implanted, now you probably know people who have pacemakers, and, defibrillators now look just like a pacemaker. It's a small.
My previous guest before Jesse had one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just implanted in the shoulder. It's this tiny thing. Back then, it was like the size of a Coke can, and it had to be implanted in my abdomen.
Wow.
And I had to have my chest opened and 2 patches put around the heart, the capacitors that delivered the shock. It was a big deal. Mm-hmm. But when I came back from my research years, they allowed me to go into the electrophysiology lab with all the equipment that we had in the operating room and to
As a
demonstrate
trial.
that it was fine.
Almost
that
like a penicillin challenge.
Exactly. And so they said, okay, they cleared me to continue. And
How happy were you that day?
yeah, it was everything. I mean, you know, to be so, you know, certain that this was how I wanted to spend my life, and then have that sort of taken away was one of the most difficult things that I, you know, had faced up until that point in my life. So, you know, the next 30 years, I was protected by this.
Was it shocking you randomly, or?
Well, not randomly, but I had, during the next 30 years, I had 7 cardiac arrests.
Wow.
And for the first several of these, the device saved my life. And then my heart disease progressed to a point where the device, you know, didn't reverse the arrhythmia. And I had, you know, one time 40 minutes of CPR.
Asystole or a non-shockable rhythm, or what?
Well, eventually they shocked me externally. And, you know, that the likelihood of surviving that is
40
about
minutes.
5%. It's really low. I was very lucky.
Probably high quality CPR in those.
Really
moments,
good CPR from, I was actually at a Broadway show, but there was a doctor and a nurse who were nearby, and I don't know who they are.
Really?
If they're watching this, I'd love to meet you someday.
Wow. What was the name of the show, in case they're able to?
It was School of Rock.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, it was a showstopper, literally. It was a real New York moment because, you know, my wife screamed, and the lights went up, and they did, you know, this work on me, and the first alarmers arrived and shocked me, and I woke up, and they lifted up the gurney, you know, like they do up into the air, and I got a standing ovation.
Wow.
Waved to people as we were going out. And then another time I had a cardiac arrest and was in a coma for almost a month in Patagonia, so in the middle of nowhere, and was very lucky to survive that. When I woke up, I couldn't speak, you know.
A lot of PTOT, probably.
Yes,
Speech therapy.
Walk.
Swallow
you know,
evaluations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why in Patagonia?
I'm an outdoorsman, and yeah. So my first cardiac arrest was in Patagonia, and then 7 years later I had that one.
Yeah.
So I wasn't smart enough not to go back. But
and then how did the heart transplant come into the picture?
right. So you know, and I think this is I think, you know, one of the reasons that it's so important to sort of talk through this is because it's a great demonstration of what we were talking about earlier. Our allocation systems are based on severity of illness. So you have to be really sick in order to get an organ. And even to get listed for an organ, we're not going to list people, put them on the list, unless they're likely to, you know, be in a position where they get allocated an organ. So unfortunately, most people die before they even get on the list, you know, as we mentioned earlier, like 90% of the people, because you have to get so sick. And each one of these cardiac arrests, you know, you put it all together. I was just very lucky. Because any one of them, you know, could have resulted in my death. In the end, I was in Italy at a medical convention and had something called a ventricular tachycardic storm, where I had one cardiac arrest after another. Wow. Enrolled into, you know, a small place in Italy, into this ER. Got the last rites. The first person I saw was a priest, and you know, and then had another cardiac arrest while I was, you know, on the table in the emergency room. And then the next day they stabilized me on drips, and you know, I was like, okay, we're not gonna do Patagonia again. You know, I got to get out of here.
I'm gonna stay within.
I got to get out of here.
On-call hour reach of a hospital.
Well, no, because you know, they said we think, you know, you're gonna have to stay here for weeks till we can stabilize this situation, and I knew that this was sort of my ticket, because that's one of the things that gives you a status 1 listing. So you're high priority if you have, you know, these multiple arrests one after another. So I needed to get back to NYU. And so actually I signed out against medical advice, and one of my friends who was at the meeting came and they gave, you know, the Italian people are so different than anyone else. They're so compassionate, and so they left my Heplocks in my arm, and they gave my friend these preloaded syringes of resuscitation medications,
like epinephrine.
And he sat next to me, and we got on a Lufthansa flight and flew back, and I checked into the ICU, and a month later I had a heart transplant.
Wow.
Now, you know, because of my size, and it would be the same thing with you, it's very difficult for heart transplants, you have to have a heart that is the right size. And if you're, you know, over 6 feet, it's very hard to match you. So they thought, you know, it could be a year of staying in the ICU on drips, you know, until I would get a heart. We had just done a trial where we were using, because of the opioid epidemic, there were suddenly all of these hearts and other organs that had hepatitis C. About 25% of the people who die from overdoses have hepatitis C from needle sharing. And those were getting discarded. And so we did a trial where, because we had the new direct-acting antivirals, these new hepatitis C drugs that were showing great promise, but no one had ever given someone hepatitis C while they were getting immunosuppression for an organ transplant. So we didn't know what would happen.
Right.
But we did a pilot trial with kidneys where we did 10 patients, gave them the drugs right after we gave them a hepatitis C organ, and they were hepatitis C negative, and they got hepatitis C, but were able to clear it. So I told my doctors that that's what I wanted to do. That's what I had been telling my patients to do. And so I received a heart from a drug overdose victim, young person who had hepatitis C, and I got hepatitis C on the third day after my transplant, took the pills for 2 months, and it cleared. And that's really probably the only reason I was able to get a heart that quickly.
Wow.
And now, you know, everybody does
It's
that.
standard of care.
Standard of care, yeah.
What's the future look like for transplant surgery? Are we going to be growing organs? What's on the horizon?
You know, this whole journey that I had and realizing, believe it or not, as a transplant surgeon, you're really just looking through the keyhole of the problem, and you're just seeing patients who get a transplant, right? I mean, we're aware, like when patients die on the list, sometimes, frequently, they just get too sick, they fall off the list. You're like the people who are
lose contact with
doing the surgeons aren't aware of all of this all the time, and so we just see the success measured by them getting an organ.
Almost like a survivorship bias feeling.
It's a survivorship bias, yeah. And so you get this sense that it's you know, you're going to be okay, right? And then I went through this whole period of time realizing that was not the case. That, you know, the likelihood of me not getting an organ was far greater than receiving a transplant. And I was just very fortunate, each time I had a cardiac arrest that I didn't die. And so, that experience made it just absolutely crystal clear, like the magnitude of this problem. And because I walked in those shoes. And so I decided, during that, as I was getting closer to my transplant, that really the rest of my career was going to be devoted to creating abundance of organs. And there are basically three leading possibilities. Artificial organs, sort of like the fully implantable artificial heart, which is a mechanical heart. Now that, showing promise for hearts, but, lungs, the livers, not so much. The what we call bioartificial organs, so those are organs that are created basically either by decellularizing, like an animal organ, like let's take a lung. You remove all the cells, you have a scaffolding, and then you lay down human stem cells on top of that and coax them down different pathways to recreate a lung. You can also do that with 3D printing. You can create that same scaffolding, right? And so, that's a possibility, but that's down the road a bit because you're starting from scratch, basically. Right. And then xenotransplantation, which is what I decided this is where I'm going to put my energy. And that's using animal organs, and we've decided that, pigs are really the best donor candidates for xenotransplantation. And
for all organs or just kidneys?
For all organs.
Okay.
And, these pigs are cloned, and for the most part, at least the really complex gene edits, are cloned animals. They have we use CRISPR technology to knock out certain genes that, make it more difficult, cause an immune response, and also put human transgenes, that make human proteins in certain pivotal genes that, encode proteins for like regulation of complex systems like blood clotting, like something called complement, which is really important for the immune response, inflammation. And so, do these gene edits and then transplant those organs into humans, make them more compatible to humans.
Wow. So is it fair to say that the future is bright?
The future is bright. Yeah. So we, in 2021, we did the first gene edited pig kidney transplant. We transplanted that organ into someone who was brain dead. Okay. So as a trial. And that allowed us to sort of fail safe, if you will. It really de-risked the situation. So we weren't doing it directly into a living human at first, and we did 6 of those. So essentially, the idea is this is a person who had wanted to donate their organs, had expressed that desire. They were brain dead. We approached the family after it turned out that their organs, weren't able to be transplanted. They had some issue that prevented the organs from being suitable for transplantation. So we'd approach the family for whole body donation for the purposes of testing these organs.
Wow.
So that's how it started in 2021. And from 2021 to now, we did a number of those decedents. We also tested some hearts. And then we did a couple of really sick patients who are sort of on death's door. Those are sort of used to be called compassionate use approvals from the FDA. And now we're in clinical trials in just 5 years. So, it's pretty amazing. It's moving right along, and we have 2 kidney clinical trials now. One for a really complicated gene-edited kidney that has 10 gene edits, and then a rather simple one that has just 1 gene edit, but we transplant the thymus from the pig. We actually operate on the pig 2 months before we procure the organ, and we put the thymus underneath the capsule of the kidney. Now, the thymus is what educates the immune system, and so we try to re-educate the recipient's immune system to not recognize that pig organ as being foreign. And it looks very promising. It's been done in a lot of animal models. So we have those 2 trials going on. So sort of the extreme, the 10 gene edited, all those pigs have to be cloned. That's a limitation. It's expensive. It's harder to scale. The 1 gene edit, those pigs are bred. So very easy. Pigs breed 3 times a year, have big litters, up to 20 piglets, and you could really scale that and produce an unlimited supply of organs. So we'll see which one looks most promising.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, look, obviously I have to thank you for your work in keeping humanity in this subject very much alive, both from sharing your story and the work that you're doing with your patients, with your residents, the med students that you're training, literally the future of transplantation. Where can people go to be curious about your work? If they're donation curious, where would you like to direct them?
I mean, we're enrolling patients into these trials right now. So there's certain, obviously, pretty stringent guidelines about, they have to be more likely to not receive a kidney in the next 5 years than to get a transplant. So these are patients who, will probably end up in that 2/3 that doesn't get across the finish line with human organs. But yeah, there's if you go to the NYU Langone website, there's and you type in xenotransplantation or clinical trials, or you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and you'll see our trial, and you can inquire that way.
Yeah, we'll definitely drop those links in the description so folks can easily click on those. Parting words for our audience.
Well, we've what we're talking about is kind of a bit futuristic, although I think the future is here.
Yeah.
But it's how we can really create abundance and solve this organ scarcity problem. But we have to deal with where we are right now, which is that, more people are dying waiting for organs than receiving them. And so, this is donor, the month that we think about donor awareness. So, if you haven't had that kitchen table conversation that I mentioned earlier with your family to tell them what your preferences are. I mean, we all think about life insurance. We think about, things that we want to pass on after we die, but very few people, as it turns out, really have that discussion with their family. So have that discussion. Have it sooner. Don't put it off.
Yeah.
And if you're healthy, you have 2 kidneys, you can donate part of your liver, and you either know someone who is in this terrible predicament that I was in, and so many people in this country right now, millions of people. Please think about donating while you're alive, so those are the things that I think are so critical at this moment, and we'll keep working and trying to make this thing better so that at some point in the future we don't have to rely on people's goodwill, although we'll always appreciate that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Dr. Montgomery, thank you so much. Appreciate the conversation and the great work you've been doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Organ transplants are wild, but they're not the only extreme surgery doctors perform. Click here to see surgeries that blew my mind, and as always, stay happy and healthy.